Welcome to the Health Coach Nation podcast. My name is Hailey Rowe, and I'm a sales and marketing coach and LinkedIn lead generation service provider. I work with health, life, and mindset coaches and online service-based business owners to help them get more sales, shift their time to the client-generating activities instead of just the busy work, and overcome that social media overwhelm. Let's get into the show. If you're ready to take on your next paying clients, I have good news. My free 4 Basics of Client Attraction and How to Stand Out class is live at haileyrowe.com/client-attraction. In the class, you're going to learn the top 2 traits I recommend for most coaches and entrepreneurs if they really want to turn this into a career. You're going to learn how you can build demand for your services and stop getting crickets on your posts. You're going to learn the sales roadmap I used to improve my sales conversion rate and help my clients do the same. And you're going to learn so much more. So go to haileyrowe.com/client-attraction and get your copy of the class today. Hey, I am live today with the one and only Kresser. He is a leader in functional medicine, in nutrient density, and holistic wellness. I've gotten to listen to his podcast for many years now, and I'm so excited to have you here today, Chris. And you were saying that you got into health because you were not doing so well. You were feeling sick. And so tell us a little bit about your story and your journey.
Yeah, it's a very long story. I'll keep it short. I was traveling in my 20s and I got very sick in Indonesia. And then that turned into a decade-long journey back to health where, I saw probably 30 plus doctors in over 3 countries, tried every single thing you can imagine, special diets, conventional treatments, alternative treatments, energy healing, shamanism, the whole 9 yards. And eventually I discovered an ancestral diet, paleo type of diet, even though it wasn't, that was still pretty new at the time, and functional medicine. And those were largely what brought me back to health. So I decided to go back to school and become a clinician myself so I could help other people who were also dealing with complex chronic illnesses.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's how a lot of the listeners who are health coaches or wellness professionals get started, is they have their own thing they have to work through, and they find how powerful it is to transform their health. And I'm curious, because you talk a lot about nutrition and all the science, what is something maybe you've changed your views on over the last 3 to 5 years in this field?
Let's see. I often change my mind, so it's actually hard to answer that question. I from the beginning have made a point just to really keep an open mind and stay current with the research. And when new research is published that changes my view on a particular issue, then I will change my view. I mean, one example that comes to mind. This is still kind of an evolving subject or curiosity for me, is omega-6 and omega-3 intake and ratios. So, when I wrote my first book, a lot of the research was pointing towards the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio being a very important indicator for health. Now it seems that the denominator of that ratio is what really matters, which is the omega-3 intake. At least if we're talking about whole food sources of omega-6. So like avocados, for example, are very high in omega-6. Chicken is pretty high in omega-6. Almonds and other nuts and seeds are high in omega-6. If you're including even a moderate amount of those whole foods in your diet, you could have a fairly high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. I don't think that that's problematic for most people at this point, as long as they're getting enough omega-3s. I still do think that omega-6 from industrially processed seed oils like sunflower, safflower, canola, soybean, cottonseed, et cetera, which are in all the processed and refined foods that comprise 60% of the calories that Americans eat now, are most definitely still problematic. But perhaps not as much because of the ratio, but because those oils are oxidized and rancid and can wreak havoc in our bodies once we eat them. So I would say that the research has evolved over the last 10 years on that subject, and it does now seem more clear that it's the omega-3 intake that matters most, and that whole food sources of omega-6 in moderation are probably not, not something that most people have to worry about.
Interesting. That's a good insight. And when you talk about nutrient density, what do you mean? Because that's a term that I've heard you use, and a lot of wellness professionals are listening and talk about nutrition with their clients. So I'm just curious, how do you define nutrient density, and maybe what are some ways that coaches can start to talk about that more with their clients and approach it?
Yeah. So when we talk about nutrient density, we first have to understand that the nutrients in our food fall into two categories: macronutrients and micronutrients. So macronutrients refer to of course, the three main substances required in large or macro amounts, hence the name: protein, carbs, and fat. And then micronutrients are the vitamins, minerals, and other compounds that we require in micro or small amounts for normal physiological function. And of course, we need both to survive and stay healthy. But the term nutrient density refers to the concentration of micronutrients and amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein in a given food. There's no doubt that carbohydrates and fats and proteins are important, and the specific ratios that we might eat of each of those are relevant to our health. But I would argue that there's been too much focus on macronutrients over the past 2 decades, 3 decades, even 4, like the low-fat diet craze in the 80s and 90s, then the low-carb diet craze, and then keto, and then low protein versus high protein. It's all important, but a lot of the times the critical role that micronutrients play has been left out of the discussion. So when we're looking at nutrient density, we're specifically looking at the concentration of those vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and amino acids in the food that we eat.
Interesting. Okay. And so what would you say are some common maybe mistakes where wellness professionals could help their clients with that, or maybe some shifts they should make in helping their clients actually achieve better nutrient density?
Yeah, well, I think if you were to ask most people, including most health professionals, what the most nutrient dense foods are, they might say things like kale, blueberries, acerola cherries, mushrooms, maybe beans and whole grains and foods like that, because that's what's been drilled into our head for so long. But that's not true. We actually have very good research that's been published in the last few years quantifying the nutrient density of foods in the diet. And there are a few key things to understand about how this recent research is different than previous research. Number one, it's looking at the presence of the micronutrients that are of greatest concern for human health, because they're, number one, essential, meaning our bodies can't produce them on their own. We have to obtain them from the diet or supplements. And number two, they're the micronutrients that are are the most common deficiencies worldwide. So those include vitamin A, or retinol, folate, vitamin B12, calcium, iron, and zinc, particularly for women of reproductive age. And that's true both in developing countries and in the developed world. There's a common misconception that if you live in the US or Canada or some other relatively wealthy industrialized country, you don't have to worry about nutrient deficiency. That's completely false. The nutrient deficiencies are common and even rampant, even in the industrialized world. So the second thing is that most of the initial studies on nutrient density didn't consider bioavailability, which is a critical factor, because we know that the amount of nutrients that a food contains is not the amount of nutrients that you're going to absorb from that food. So what we absorb from a food depends on several factors, including the specific form the nutrient takes. So for example, heme iron, which is found in animal products, is much more bioavailable than non-heme or plant-based forms of iron. Also, the presence of or absence of anti-nutrients. Oxalic acid is a great example of this, where if you look at the amount of calcium in spinach on paper, it looks pretty high. You might think that you could meet all of your calcium needs just by eating spinach. But what you may not realize is that the bioavailability of calcium from spinach is only 5%. And that's largely because of the presence of oxalic acid, which is an anti-nutrient that interferes with calcium absorption. So of the 115 milligrams of calcium present in a serving of spinach, you only get 6 milligrams. You only absorb 6 of those 115 milligrams. So you'd have to consume 16 cups of spinach to get the same amount of bioavailable calcium in 1 glass of milk. So that's another big factor. And then the third factor is the presence of other nutrients that boost bioavailability of a particular nutrient. So for example, we know that copper enhances iron absorption, is required for the metabolism of iron. So if you are getting enough iron but you're copper deficient, you can actually develop iron deficiency and even iron deficiency anemia. Likewise, vitamin D and magnesium have a synergistic relationship, so that if you're taking vitamin D or you're outside in the sunlight and you're getting enough, but you don't have enough magnesium, you'll develop vitamin D deficiency despite adequate levels of vitamin D intake or sun exposure. So all of these factors influence how much we actually absorb of the nutrients that we're eating in a particular food. So this study considered that. It was the first study that considered bioavailability and factored it into the calculations. And what they found, this is a study by Ty Beal, who works for an NGO that's tasked with ending malnutrition worldwide. And they quantified the level of nutrition in foods to determine how much of a given food you would have to eat to provide 1/3 of the recommended intakes of those nutrients I mentioned: vitamin A, folate, B12, calcium, iron, and zinc, for women of reproductive age. And so a lower score is better, right? Because if it's a lower score, it means you have to eat very little of that food to get that recommended amount. It means it's extremely nutrient dense. So I'm going to read you the top 10 foods on this list. It might be surprising for some of your viewers and listeners. So number 1 was liver with a score of 11. So you only have to eat 11 calories of liver to meet those goals, which is just remarkable. That's a tiny, tiny amount of liver. Next was spleen at 62, small dried fish at 65, dark leafy green vegetables 72, bivalves like oysters 90, kidney, another beef organ 125, heart 163, crustaceans like shrimp 193, goat 205, beef 275, and eggs 281, and cow's milk 287. So there are a few things to note about this list. The first is that 4 of the 7 top foods are organ meats, which, are not commonly eaten in our diet anymore. They used to be. And then 17 of the top 20 foods on the list are animal foods. So this completely flies in the face of conventional wisdom, which would hold that, all of the most nutrient-dense foods are plant foods. Now, the caveat here is that this study was looking at essential vitamins and minerals that I just mentioned. It was not looking at phytonutrients. And we do know that phytonutrients like polyphenols, carotenoids, and flavonoids, diallyl sulfides, and lignans, while they're not essential, meaning we can live without them, we're probably not going to be optimally healthy without them. So if you did factor those in, that the scale would have looked different. But still, with the essential vitamins and minerals that we know we need to survive and thrive, those are the most nutrient-dense foods.
Wow. Very interesting. And I got to try out your supplement, the liver supplement. Your team was amazing in sending that. And it's pretty cool to see how much nutrients are available from that kind of thing. And let's be real, in today's world, we're probably not going to be cooking up a lot of organ meats and things like that. So how can somebody who's because a lot of the listeners here love learning about this stuff and they dig the science and they dig, going to the farmer's market and finding their own special food, but their clients don't. Their clients are people who are like, just tell me what to do, give me a pill to take, tell me, help me, but that's not their jam. So what would you say to our listeners who are coaching their clients where they're like, my client wants to be healthy and they hired me to help them and sift through things for them, but they're not going to be eating liver and stuff like that. So what could they do to help their clients get those nutrients? And maybe it is, pairing supplements and you tell me, but say to that.
Yeah, I mean, always the goal is to make your diet as nutrient dense as possible. I like to say you can't supplement yourself out of a bad diet, but you can certainly enhance your health and well-being by adding supplements on top of a good diet. And if your diet is terrible, adding supplements is better than not having them at all. So there's a spectrum, right? I would never tell anyone, hey, just eat a crappy diet and then take a bunch of supplements. I don't think that works. I mean, it might help a little bit, but you're still going to be subject to the all of the downsides that a bad diet has, which go beyond just lack of nutrients, that you can replace with supplements. Having said that, yes, I acknowledge that not everyone is really wants to make this their full-time job or part-time job, like some people enjoy doing, and they just, they'll do their best to eat healthy, but they need a little extra support. And I would also say that even for people who are making this their part-time job and are really passionate and dedicated, we often need extra support too, because we're not living in the same world that our ancestors lived in. We have declining soil quality, so a decline in the level of nutrients that are present in the foods we're eating. So, for example, we'd have to eat 8 oranges today to get the same level of nutrition that our grandparents got from eating just 1 orange. That's a dramatic change in 2 generations. And the list, you can look at lists of all kinds of different vitamins and minerals in foods and how much we absorb now from eating them, and it's much lower than it was even 20, 30, much less 100 years ago. We have a growing toxic burden with heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides, glyphosate, BPA, other organic chemicals, and these all bind to vitamins and minerals and prevent their absorption. We have an increase in chronic disease, which increases the demand for nutrients and reduces absorption of nutrients. We have very common medications that people take that interfere with nutrient absorption. So even when you're doing all the right things, it can be hard to meet your nutrient needs from diet alone. So this is why I am a big believer in supplementation to improve health. And in answer to your question, as a matter of fact, I just printed this study out that was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, just hot off the press, actually. And it's looking at the effect of a multivitamin versus placebo on cognitive function. And this is similar to a trial that was published back in July. And they found that just taking a multivitamin improved global cognition scores, episodic memory, and several other measures of attention and cognitive function. And the magnitude of effect on global cognition was equivalent to reducing cognitive aging by 2 years. That's pretty amazing, for a multivitamin. And the trial that I mentioned in July actually found that it was equivalent to reducing aging by 3 years, cognitive aging. So you're basically preventing 3 years of cognitive decline simply by restoring optimal nutrient levels. That's an incredible finding. And so I think a multivitamin, not just any multivitamin, because there are a lot of really poor quality products out there, but a really high quality multivitamin can really help, as this study suggested, restore and replace some of the nutrients that we aren't getting from food and just provide a bit of an insurance policy. And then you have, additional ways that you can increase nutrient intake with superfoods. So what we just talked about, one, Hailey, that an organ supplement, which contains liver, but also other beef organs that have similar but distinct nutrient profiles. So kidney, heart, pancreas, and spleen are all very nutrient dense, as that scale that I mentioned indicated, but they have different nutrients. So when you combine them together, you get the best of all of the nutrient profiles of all of the different organs. And these are organs that are harvested from pasture-raised cows. They're immediately frozen and dried and turned into a powder and put into a capsule. So you don't have to deal with the unpleasant taste and texture or smell of preparing organ meats that a lot of people don't like, but you still get the full benefits of them. And virtually all cultures on this planet consumed organ meats, even preferred them over the muscle meats that we tend to eat now, like boneless, skinless chicken breast or lean steaks and things that we've been accustomed to. And even in the United States and other industrialized countries, our grandparents or perhaps great grandparents, depending on how old you are, in the early 20th century, organ meats were still very common in the diet and a preferred form of meat intake. So that's organs are one of the most powerful superfoods you can eat, as we discussed in terms of the nutrient scale. Another one is mushrooms. So I'm sure a lot of people have been hearing about mushrooms lately, on their social feeds. They are very rich in compounds called terpenoids and also beta glucans, which have a profound impact on gut health, brain health, skin health. They're rich in essential vitamins and minerals, and they have been used for thousands of years in traditional cultures to improve health and extend longevity. In fact, the very first medical textbook that's ever been discovered in China, the exact dating is unclear, but several thousand years old, talked about reishi mushroom and they used to be reserved for use only by the emperor and nobility in China because they were so revered and valued. So these days, that's fortunately not the case. We can all benefit from them. But most people don't like to eat the amount of mushrooms they would need to get the benefits. Or there are mushrooms like reishi that I just mentioned, or turkey tail or chaga, that are very bitter and chewy, and they're not good to eat. So you have to prepare them with hot water or alcohol extraction, and it's just time consuming, and most people won't do it. So, taking a formula that has those mushrooms all together in a capsule is much easier and more practical for most people.
Yeah, great tips. Very interesting. And from a standpoint, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So you have had several business ventures in the wellness field, and a lot of our listeners probably really admire that. And I'm curious, what has been maybe a time where you've had to pivot or shift or change or adapt that was challenging for you, but you ultimately learned something from it, and maybe you could share just a business lesson you've had?
Well, the most recent was that we wound down our Adapt Health Coach training program. I'm very proud of that program. We trained over 2,000 coaches in over 50 countries around the world. And we had, I think, the highest pass rate on the National Board Health and Wellness coaching exam of any other coaching school that I'm aware of. So we were not just training people, we were giving them the actual skills they needed to demonstrate competency and go out and be good coaches in the world. Unfortunately, it was not feasible or practical as a business venture. In the level of training that we needed to provide, the hands-on mentorship and really diligent experiential training that was necessary to produce the kinds of coaches that we wanted to produce and send out into the world was not practical from a financial perspective. And so I had a choice, either to water down the program essentially and remove, hands-on training and experiential mentorship, and then which would potentially lead to people graduating that we didn't feel had the training and skills they needed to succeed, or we could not do it. And so I chose to not do it because I feel very strongly about producing services and products that are the highest quality possible. And I'm not willing to put something out there in the world that doesn't meet my own standards for quality. I would rather just not do it. That was a painful and difficult decision. It affected a lot of people. I had to let a lot of employees go. Our graduates and students that were in the program were obviously very disappointed. But ultimately, it was the ethical choice for me to make.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you for sharing that. And I think it's very important to always, know what your values are, know what you want to create in the world. And if you're finding that your offer and, what you're doing in your business doesn't match, or there needs to be a tweak, it can be a tough choice. But ultimately, in the long run, it's probably a choice that is better because you're feeling in integrity and you're able to stand by what you do. So, what would you tell someone who is maybe a new entrepreneur in the wellness space and they really want to make it and they want to grow a personal brand? Any advice you'd give them as far as just when it comes to staying with it and putting yourself out there?
Yeah, staying with it is good advice that you just offered. It's entrepreneurship is difficult. There's always going to be lots of challenges and twists and turns, and perseverance is probably one of the most important qualities to cultivate for success. There have been lots of times where I've come up against multiple roadblocks, but I was confident and clear in my vision, and I knew it was possible, and that's what enabled me to keep going and not see the obstacles as signs that it's not a good idea or that it's not going to work, as just seeing them as obstacles and things that I needed to navigate and overcome. I think so, working backwards from that having a very clear vision of what you want, knowing what your values are, knowing not just what you want to do, but what you don't want to do. I think that is really something that people don't think enough about. If you're thinking even about financial goals, I would think about targets for growth, but I would also think about limits to growth, because there are challenges on both ends. If your business grows too fast or too slowly, that's obviously a problem. It's probably the more common problem. But if it grows too quickly, that can also be a huge problem, and you can end up making decisions that compromise your values or that you wouldn't want to make otherwise. So being very clear on what your North Star is, what is getting you up in the morning, what is guiding you to do what you're doing, and what vision do you have, and just relentlessly sticking to that no matter what happens is probably the most important thing that I would advise. Because as I just said, with the health coach program, there was a time there where if my priorities would have been just keeping it going at all costs and just generating more revenue and sales, then there were lots of decisions I could have made to change the program, but those decisions were not aligned with the clarity that I had about my who I am and what kinds of products and services I want to put out in the world. So that's what enabled me to make that decision, even though it was an enormously, like I said, painful decision with a lot of repercussions and a lot of impact on a lot of different people. It was that clarity that enabled me to do it and stick with it and know that I was making the right decision despite all of those difficulties. And if I didn't have that clarity and that commitment to those values, then I would have been lost, frankly.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So when it comes to, on the positive side, what you're doing now with your supplement company and all of the things that you're working on, what's something that's working well for you right now, or that you're really, excited about, or that's just really jiving?
I'm just thrilled by the response of our customers to Adapt Naturals. We've only been in operation for about 1.5 years, but we have over 16,000 customers already. We're growing rapidly, but more than that is just seeing the reviews and the testimonials that people are sending in about the experience that they're having with the products. My goal with Adapt Naturals was to leverage my 15 plus years of clinical experience in a line of products that would be accessible to a very broad audience of people. A lot of the things I've done in my past have been, things I'm very proud of and have been enormously helpful, I think, to a lot of people. But, the functional medicine clinician, working with a clinician is expensive, and only a very small percentage of the population is going to be able to do that. That's what led me to start training doctors in my ADAPT practitioner training program, because I knew that we needed more doctors with functional medicine training that could reach more people. But again, the problem still existed there, where even though I was training more doctors, the number of people who could access private functional medicine treatment was still very low. That's actually what led me to launch the health coach program, because health coaching was a modality that was more accessible than working with a functional medicine clinician. And especially if it ends up getting covered by insurance, that will make it even more accessible. And still, even then, it's just something that, seeing a coach every week or every other week, a lot more people can afford that, but still, perhaps not as many as I would like. And so every step of my career has been about scaling impact. Like, how can I continue to grow and scale my impact and make the things that I have learned that have been so helpful to me and all of my patients available to a wider audience? And that's exactly what's happening with Adapt Naturals. Somebody could buy one of our supplements for $40 or $50. And granted, that's still not within the budget for some people, but it's accessible to a much broader audience, and people are they're writing about and sharing incredible, life-changing transformations that they're having with the product. So that's always what has motivated me to do the work that I do. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's what gets me excited. The money and everything like that comes if that's working. I really, if it was just money without that, I wouldn't do it. I would go into a different field, where maybe have gone into finance or mergers and acquisitions or something like that, if I just wanted to make money. But I know that if I really help people and focus on helping people above all else, then that will lead to good outcome. That's what I've learned in my career.
I love that. That's a great message. And where can everybody stay connected with you and check you out?
So Kresser.com is my educational site. We've got 13 free ebooks, my podcast there I've been doing, believe it or not, since 2010. So I was one of the OG health podcasters, I think. 15 million downloads over that period of time, and I've have over 1,200 articles that I've written on my blog, my website, which I started in 2008. So I've been doing this a while, and there's just a ton of free information there. Pretty much everything on that website is free, which I am really, passionate about, and it's important to me. And then adaptnaturals.com is the supplement brand. That's where you can find all of our products. And then we have KresserInstitute.com is where the Adapt Practitioner Training Program lives. And that's still going. That's been going since 2016. We've trained 700 doctors and other clinicians in 38 countries around the world in functional medicine, which I'm very proud of. And that's an amazing program that's still in operation.
Love it. Awesome. Well, we even got a comment saying someone's been following you for many years, and they were very happy to see you here. And I feel the same. I've learned a lot from you, specifically about skin. I listened to you for gut health type of stuff back in the day when I was really struggling a lot with acne. So thank you for the work you do. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Hailey. Keep up the great work. Thanks everyone for watching and listening.
Thanks so much for listening to this podcast. And if it's really helpful for you, I'd really appreciate if you share it and or leave a written podcast review. This tells the podcast sites that our show is useful, and it will be promoted to more people that way. Thanks again.